Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen, and this is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, a gathering place for fellow fiends the world over to discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you want to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe go back and check out some of our previous episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to discuss in the future. That kind of connection is exactly what we're looking for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. Unleashed upon a hungry-for-sci-fi movie-going public in the summer of 1954, Them was the first of the big bug movies and proved to be the year's biggest moneymaker for Warner Brothers. Originally slated to be shot in color and 3D, the studio cut the budget at the last minute, although the stark black and white cinematography may have worked to its advantage, yielding an impressively eerie visual landscape. These elements, combined with extraordinary sound design, art direction, and solid ensemble performances, resulted in a true genre classic that would go on to earn an Academy Award nomination for its imaginative and thrilling special effects. Them is also famous for inspiring nuclear monster movies to come, conjuring a common formula for countless imitators to follow. Among the many atomically revived or mutated creatures rampaging through the 1950s, we saw Them's cinematic DNA in It Came From Beneath the Sea, Tarantula, the Deadly Mantis, The Monster That Challenged the World, The Black Scorpion, Beginning of the End, Attack of the Crab Monsters, and Attack of the Giant Leeches, to name but a few. In a decade where science fiction movies reigned supreme, Them remains one of the most influential films ever made, one that allowed moviegoers of the moment to process their fears of the atomic age in a safe, exciting, and entertaining fashion. It's time to let the big bug shine. We're going to be talking about Them. Let's bring everybody in to chat, and let's say hello to Katie Glidewell, aka the blonde in front, the bald in front. What are we going by these days?
Right now we're going by the bald in front, the artist formerly known as the blonde in front, at least for the next 3 months.
Matthew Amador.
Hey there, also being held together by spit. Great to be here.
Alan Trump.
Hello to my fellow myrmecologists. I'm not quite sure what that means, but it was impressive. They mentioned that in the movie, so I'm looking forward to getting that classification too.
And Doug Long.
Hi, I'm not an aunt, but I am an uncle, and I look forward to talking about them.
And we are going to be chatting about Them from 1954, celebrating its anniversary. Thank you for coming on the show, everybody, and a welcome. So yeah, 1954 was a heck of a year for sci-fi monsters. We had Creature from the Black Lagoon, we had Godzilla, and then we had Them. And we had just had The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms the year before, which is kind of the template for giant monsters. And it's funny how Them kind of follows the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms playbook in some ways. And having just watched the 1954 Godzilla recently, it's interesting how those two films kind of follow a similar timeline and plot course. And yet they probably didn't know anything about each other because they were being, operated on different sides of the ocean. But let's dive in. Doug, if you don't mind kicking us off, tell us how you came to Them for the first time.
Well, no question about that. Growing up in central Indiana, our horror movie host was Sammy Terry on Friday nights. And so that's certainly where I saw Them and Tarantula and all those good buggy movies.
And let's bounce over to Alan.
I think most probably same sort of thing. Growing up in the mid-'60s in Ohio, I probably saw it either on the Ghoulardi, Big Chuck and Houlihan horror movie hosted films, one of those. I do know that I saw it, and I remember it was one of my mother's favorites because when we would go visit in other parts of the state to visit relatives, we would look to see what was playing on the local channels for horror movies. And I remember one time we looked and he said, well, there's this movie called Burn Witch Burn, and then there's another one called Them, or Them that we'd seen. And she said, let's watch Them, because I always loved those giant ants.
Nice. Matthew.
Likewise, my mom brought this movie to me. Of the two movies that she loved growing up in the 50s and 60s, the ones that she quotes the most often are It's a Wonderful Life and Them.
No way.
Shoot the antennae. Shoot the antennae. Over waffles every morning. Shoot the antennae.
I want to come over to your house for breakfast. And Katie, how about you?
like you gentlemen, I would actually watch this. I think late 70s, early 80s. The Saturday morning film of the week. It was them, The Time Machine, Jason the Argonauts, all that stuff. So I remember watching them. I think I would watch it by myself because my dad would say, "Oh yeah, this is good," and then leave. Luckily, I bought this for my dad and all those movies that I used to watch. And then when my nephews were growing up, he would play these movies for them. And I remember my 3-year-old nephew would quote, it's like, "I smell formic acid," and being so serious, like so serious. And then also said like, "Make me a sergeant, buy me the booze. Make me a sergeant, buy me the booze." So seeing a 3-year-old do that, but it was just nice to have that connection with my parents, like watching these movies with them instead of just like, "Here's your rectangular babysitter, enjoy." So it's nice that it's now generational. Hopefully my nephews will do the same with their kids.
That is super fun. This really is kind of the dawning of the big bug age. And it really does also start the magical powers of radiation. It is the atomic monster age. Doug, have you taught this film at all in your film studies at DePaul?
No, not this one. But in terms of that, one thing that surprised me in rewatching it was that it's not shaded about that. They talk very openly. This happened largely because, and they say twice in the film, 1945, atomic bomb explosion.
And I mean, it takes place in the desert. And that kind of, we had just, when you were on the panel and we talked about it came from outer space, like the desert quality, like there's a nice kind of like mystical quality to it. And there's the quiet, but then you start hearing the wind, and then you hear, of course, that iconic them ant sound.
Yeah, there's something about this cinematography of this one. The opening shots of the desert, the wind blowing in several shots. It's ominous. Something's coming, but not yet.
Yeah.
And one of the first things you see in the movie is a Joshua tree, and those things are always creepy.
Let's talk about the opening, because I think it really is, in a way that sci-fi monster movies became a little cheesier as we moved further into the 50s. This one takes itself very seriously, and it's easy to take it seriously. There are times where you have Jeff Morrow just hanging on by a thread, trying to talk about this giant claw monster. But here it's very easy to, I think, invest in the situation at hand. You've got that opening scene where the pilot is flying overhead and he sees a little girl wandering alone in the desert, goes down and picks her up. And then we get our patrolman played by James Whitmore, and they go and investigate where the little girl came from. Anybody want to talk about that scene in particular?
I would agree that the suspense that creates is the first of the many suspenses we get in this film. What's wrong with her, and why isn't she saying anything? Because it's such a long time till we find out. And then, of course, we hear about ants long before we get to see one, too.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it introduces questions and curiosity. You see this child. It's not so much that we see the birth of the giant ants. We just see this haunted child, this image, this broken doll. We see the eyes on that kid. I am one to pick apart a child actor's performance for days, and that's not fair to children because they don't know what they're doing. They're vaguely just working for food. Like you hold a sugar cube in front of them and they go after it. My gosh, her haunted look is so transfixing. It holds the screen so well. It definitely plays into what you were talking about, how this is definitely taking this seriously. We're not that far away from when the bombs were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's very much still within the cultural zeitgeist, as opposed to when we get further away from things like in 20 years, and we're going to get like Night of the Lepus, and we're going to have the large rabbits. That's not taken seriously, or at least not. It goes more to like campy qualities as opposed to this. This is really taking this seriously and really draws you in with that.
Right. And you have some really, as you said, we have a solid child performance, but we have great actors on hand here. We have James Whitmore, we have Edmund Gwynn, we have James Arness, so like everyone really holds their own as an actor and really kind of sells this. And it doesn't feel like the kind of wacky science that we will definitely be seeing a lot of as the decade rolls on. Like everything feels very grounded, and they treat the ants like ants. You know, they're not some kind of like, you know, we're not getting into Empire of the Ants, you know, where they are able to hypnotize you. Like these are just ants being ants. They just happen to be giant.
You know, adding on to the child performance, it's like one, she's totally committed to that shocked face. And then when she's in the car and kind of like nestling against James Whitmore, it's just so subtle, but it's like he almost has that fatherly figure. And then when they come upon like, okay, well, here's a car and a trailer, and they're like, all right, this is no big deal. And then you go around to the side, it's like, and the entire side is completely ripped off. It's like, okay, what are we dealing with here? And what did this kid witness? And she's completely catatonic. And then when the ambulance comes and we first hear the sound that is going to be the sound that's going to bring terror, but seeing her, I mean, she does the full like mummy raise, and again her face, and then it's like, and then it goes away and she goes back down. It's like, she really doesn't get enough credit for her performance in this.
And it's also worth putting into context the fact that we hadn't had a ton of giant monster movies already. Like it's interesting to kind of go back and, well, we know that they're giant ants, you know, the film has become famous, but at the time of it, you know, its premiere, like we didn't know what had happened to that camper. Like we couldn't even imagine it. I think it's funny that the giant ants, they're after these little sugar cubes, and they actually leave a few behind. I was like, really? You know, like it seems like you if you're a giant ant, you're going to want to eat all the sugar that you can. You're not going to leave anything behind.
Aaron, do not fat shame these ants. They can say no when they want. They can stop eating when they want.
But yeah, we're talking a little bit about the actors. James Whitmore, of course, is our headliner, and he really does become the anchor of the film.
I really think so too. You know, and we're talking about that opening scene, the compassion he has with that little girl, it really sells that whole section. And then, so it's not surprising when he's sacrificial for two little boys at the end.
Yeah.
I mean, James Arness is the more traditional leading man character in this, but really James Whitmore is the one you take away.
Well, in Bill Warren's book about 1950s monster movies, when that happened with James Whitmore, he said that when he saw it in the theater, some kids bust out crying.
Yeah.
Because they felt so bad. And he says, the only other time I've seen kids cry is when the monster got killed.
Right.
First time I saw this, I actually got some tears for James Whitmore because he was a nicer guy. Right. James Arness, you know, he was like, look, I'm not putting up with this malarkey. Like, tell me what this is. I don't understand science. Meow, meow, meow. And it's like, you're a woman. I'm a man. And James Whitmore definitely had way more compassion.
Yep.
I mean, and yeah, when he sacrificed himself, which always made me mad and stuff, because it's like, just get the kids and then duck. It's obvious you're not going to make it. It's like, just duck out of the way. It's like, damn it. But yeah, I understand because I too shed some tears. And even rewatching it today, I'm like, damn it, I remember watching this for this. Oh, this was sad.
Yep. And I think it's a genuine surprise as well. Like, I don't think we think our hero is going to get killed at the end, you know, especially our biggest star in the movie. The fact that he goes down, what we've seen in the past, like in Beast of 20,000 Fathoms, is like our old professor, you know, that'll be the collateral damage. That happens a lot. We don't generally see our, you know, John Agar doesn't go down, you know, it's going to be the supporting characters. And so to see James Whitmore, I love the fact that this kind of plays against all the cliches before they were cliches. And it's interesting that everybody else decided to follow a different path. When I was watching it last night, I was kind of surprised at how little of the romance is played out. You know, like there isn't that kind of romance subplot.
Yeah, but there's a few sparks there. I mean, when at the end, Pat comes over and she looks and she sees that James Arness has been wounded in the shoulder. She's very considerate about it. So there's some sparks, but yeah, you're right. It's not an overt love story.
We never go out to dinner.
We get the male gaze shot when she's coming out of the helicopter, or whatever that is, seeing her legs.
Oh, my skirt's caught. Oh, how did this happen?
Oh, yeah. I have
happened to you?
like the quote. It's like, yeah, if she's that kind of doctor, I think I've got a fever. It's like, and here we go.
Yep,
Here's the
yep.
50s. Okay.
Yeah, my wife was saying, "Look at all the white men in the room, and
Yes.
everybody's smoking." And it's like, "Yep, this is definitely a product of its time."
Yes.
And certainly representation was.
That's right. Our country is run by old white smoking men.
But I think that our character of Pat, played by Joan Weldon, she's very strong. She's independent, and like when the time comes where she's like, you need a scientist down there. I'm a scientist. Let's leave the gender politics for another time. And I love the fact that she really is able to stand up and doesn't get mowed down by the big macho James Arness.
No, agreed. I mean, and she even brought her own jumpsuit, and she told him, it's like, yeah, you're not going to know what to see. Get out of my way. I need to go down that road.
I don't have time
Yeah.
to take you through a crash course.
One of the things I want to note too, which for some reason doesn't happen in films anytime after this is the one time when police, FBI, and the armed forces all actually work together and aren't trying to do like, you know, a penile measuring thing to see who can get the word and who can take the credit for this. And that was one of the biggest things I took from this film. Like, why did we change that? And this is really bad, you guys. See how quickly we came together and fixed this thing?
And that's the thing. They actually do all work together really well. Like there's not a bunch of like incompetent nincompoops. Like everybody actually comes up with a plan. They follow the plan. If something goes wrong, they adjust. And I love, can we talk a little bit about our monsters here? Because I think these practical puppets that we have as the ants, they are equal parts goofy and cool. And that is what this monster kid loves about them.
It's kind of the template that, Spielberg used with Jaws. He thought the shark looked kind of fake, so he put it off for so long. Then, of course, the suspense works. Here, it's not that they look necessarily realistic, but we've had this big anxious, we want to see them. And so with the sound and the bigness, they still play.
Yeah. It's interesting. The technician who created the ants is named Dick Smith. And it's not the same Dick Smith who would become the makeup genius of the 60s and 70s. But I remember when I saw Dick Smith in the credits the first time, I was like, wait a minute, this guy can do no wrong. But it was another Dick Smith. But I like these ants, and I like the fact that they are practical puppets, and it feels theatrical in a way that like the monster kid in me goes, somebody made that. Somebody is back there operating that. That's the thing that appeals to me in a way that maybe CGI and things like that do not as much, because there's not that kind of tactile quality. Like when something's grabbing James Whitmore in its mandibles, you go, oh, okay, that was a whole thing they had to do together.
But at least they waited to do that till the end.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, like watching them like shoot off his antenna.
I was impressed by the puppetry work there. I can imagine myself being a kid at the time, me being an adult kid right now, being like, how did they do that? Okay, they probably had that little thing on a mechanism. As soon as it goes, you pull that, and then this thing drops down. The tangibility of everything is just really impressive. It makes me think, you were just talking about CGI. And I was thinking about how of the most amazing movies we've had recently that have used a ton of CGI, the most striking scenes I can think of are the ones that have had a mix, at least a mix of something that's been actually in the room with them.
Like maybe something in the second Alien movie where you have the alien queen attacking.
Right, where that's a 14-foot puppet that is, and I'm sure being on set with that, Sigourney Weaver wasn't like, I'm actually being attacked by an alien queen. She's like, I've got 14 people that I have to navigate around. But the execution of it, and kind of to your point, Matthew, I love when you use it as a tool to tell the story as opposed to a crutch to kind of lean on when it comes to CGI. Like, I love the fact that you had to come up with solutions. Like, how are we going to make these giant ants move around? And there was something also just because of the bigness of them, like how they talk about like, it'd be impossible to have an ant this size, just scientifically, like it would crush itself under its own weight. And
Also, size, one thing I really liked were a lot of the sets. The first ant nest and then the ones under the sewers. They're really kind of haunting.
Yeah.
One thing about and when you first see that first ant coming over the hill and it's terrifying, Pat, that's still scary today to me.
Yeah.
And one thing I thought was very impressive, and I read this in Bill Warren's book, is of course they were originally planning on making this movie in color and 3D, and if you look close at the ant's eyes, they're all sorts of sparkles and things in them. If you see that, I would have loved to have seen that in full color.
One thing that I noticed, like rewatching it, it's not only that when they have the ant emerging, you've got the sandstorm, you've got people like trying to hear each other, and so you've got a lot of stuff going on. And again, you have James Whitmore being so gentle and kind to the professor, like making sure his eyeglasses are on. He's so compassionate and stuff. Yeah. And I realized that also in the helicopter, like he streams like, so you have to do this, so you have to do this. And it's like, oh my gosh, you're such a great guy. But having all that stuff, it's like that set, it really made me wonder, like, was that actually in Joshua Tree that they did that? Because I don't even understand how they could have done that sandstorm like that in 1954 to make it that realistic. And then having the ants just adding on top of that chaos.
Get a big wind machine and, you're pretty much good to go. The sand does the rest.
True.
I'm pretty sure OSHA was not there, or SAG-AFTRA security folks. What's fantastic about that scene too is the way that that setting, rather, with being the desert, it's very grand, it's very operatic, and I love how that then transitions towards, I would never think I would ever in my life call this operatic, but the Los Angeles River, the sewer system underneath that, which does have these very grand, just structural elements to it, and it's like, I can see this, I buy it. That's the biggest thing. This is another reason why we're talking about this movie, them. People will continue talking about them, but they may not talk about, Van Helsing.
that LA sewer system becomes something that we will see again and again in cinema. Terminator 2 makes great use of it. Grease, of course.
Right, from Grease.
And if we can talk really quick, you mentioned the reaction or the interplay between James Whitmore and Edmund Gwenn. I think Edmund Gwenn as Dr. Medford, it's a great spin on the absent-minded professor. He seems like he's going to be a little incompetent, and he turns out to be really sharp. He's genuinely informed, and he's the expert, and he's the one who delivers the lines of the gravity of the situation.
He's got a little bit more together than Cecil Calloway did in
exactly
20,000 Fathoms. Yeah, he gets to say all those great lines of those doom-filled line with mankind may be the dominant species on Earth no longer after 1 year. It's funny, you go back in movies and watch these things. He says to them at one point, he goes, they say it's getting pretty late, and he says it may be later than you think. And that's not just creepy for certain audiences. I kind of wonder if that struck another chord to show how scary it was, because that's what they used to say at the beginning of the old Lights Out radio program. That's later than you think. He knows his stuff. He can be a little bit befuddled at times, but he's great.
One of the most surprising scenes to me was his little science lesson at the Pentagon. It's kind of lengthy, and he says, "I put together a little film." Wow, he's really good.
Well, and he's the one that watching the trailer, which I'm not sure if this was the actual trailer that they used when they would promote the film, because it definitely gave a lot away. I was actually very impressed, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, you guys are giving away the farm. But he's the one who did the Bible quote, and the beast will, rule the earth. And then the whole thing at the end, it's like, we'll never know exactly, what the age of man will come upon us. And then that amazing, that score that the film has, that I feel like was like the catalyst for like so many different scores for films of this time.
And just one more thing about building an atmosphere of foreboding. I didn't notice this until, again, I just watched it again this morning, but there's a part in there when they're investigating the old torn up shack where they stole the sugar and they find the old guy full of formic acid and his beat up shotgun and stuff. on the soundtrack, you hear very clearly this radio report talking about how we have, in some parts of the world, completely conquered disease and things like that. But it's like, nah, nature's got a new surprise, and this time it's all your fault.
Yep. This film is really well shot. I think it's a really well photographed film, and the editing is really sharp as well. Like I saw a lot of like great kind of like cross-cutting and camera movement, and it's one of those things where this feels, I feel like this gets lumped in with the other B movies, you know, but it really is operating at a different level. And as several people have mentioned, the fact that this is kind of what should have been the template for the monster movies going forward. I think in Keep Watching the Skies, the Bill Warren book, he mentions at the very beginning, he's like, this would be an all-time classic if not for all the imitators that followed. Like every other big bug movie has kind of diminished the stature of them.
One thing they also mentioned in that book is the way it is shot, particularly in the second half. It's like a documentary, so that gives it a little more air of authenticity, even with giant ants running around eating people.
Right. And that whole presentation, I mean, we see that in so many monster movies to come, where the scientist comes in and does a slideshow or does, you know, a whole bunch of stock footage of something to give us some credence to, you know, the fantastic elements that we're seeing here. In addition to Edmund Gwynn, James Whitmore, James Arness, and Joan Weldon, we have a variety of like little character actors who will catch your eye. Anybody want to throw a few out?
Well, my favorite is Fess Parker. It's the guy who saw it, but they think is crazy. And apparently that's what got, Walt Disney saw that and cast him as Davy Crockett. But he's pretty enjoyable.
Which I read that trivia as well, and it makes me think, how do you get Davy Crockett from this? Can you imagine someone saying, yes, this is my audition for Davy Crockett, and this is what they give you? And you're like, that's the guy.
I need that guy that nobody believes.
And of course you have whoever the crazy guy is, you know, make me a sergeant, charge the booze. The guy who is the same guy who played the old coot out in the woods that found the blob.
And he is just memorable in both of them. And then we also have Onslow Stevens as our Brigadier General. And we see him in House of Dracula, I think. Is he our mad scientist? Yeah. There's
a guy in there named, I think his name is Sean McCrory. He always played like an Irish guy in movies. He was one of the stars in the movie Valley of the Dragons. It was one of those dinosaur films. He was on Thriller, an episode of that. So yeah, he got a lot. He was on TV quite a bit as well. Supposedly Leonard Nimoy's in there somewhere too, but I haven't found him.
Yeah, he's apparently the telegraph operator.
Oh, okay. All right.
There's this, he's on a boat. I love it that the ants end up on a boat at one point. I'm sorry. Because I wasn't expecting that. But yeah, I didn't pick him out this time around. The other person who's in it is William Schallert, who would show up in so many of these movies, but mostly for Universal. And I was curious if anybody knew, because this is Warner Brothers. I was curious if anybody knew, because it feels like he was a Universal contract player. And I just wondered if this predated that.
He's a weatherman in Monolith Monsters. I remember that.
Right. He's also in Incredible Shrinking Man.
And of course, I remember him best growing up was the father on the Patty Duke Show.
The formic acid is definitely something that kind of lends authenticity to the scientific mumbo jumbo, because we're kind of like, formic. I don't know what formic acid is, so maybe that's a thing.
It took me to Google. I can't tell you. I was just like, wait, do ants have stingers? I thought they were only the mandibles. I went down a whole Wikipedia rabbit hole reading about formic acid and ants with stingers.
And how accurate is it?
Some do, some do not. Fire ants do not have it. Fire ants have a different method, but there is another method, and they usually spray it. I did remember that. They spray it onto their...
Rather than stinging.
It doesn't come out of their mandibles, at least. It's not like a saliva thing, like when you have a Gila monster, and the saliva will be the thing that's venomous.
Well, not all ants are of the family Formicidae.
I mentioned, that like we have a Creature from the Black Lagoon that comes out in 1954. We have Godzilla that comes out in 1954. We have Them, and Them is one of those that did not. It inspired a lot of imitators, but it did not inspire a sequel or a series. And I think part of that is because the ants themselves don't have a personality. Like they are just kind of monolithic in that regard. They're just big, scary ants. You can't really latch on to that.
I agree. I think that's something that even continued on when you had the, when nature attacks movies, like a ton of them that happened in the 70s, for instance. Like you're not going to have The Swarm 2. You're not going to have a Frogs 2. Like it really ends up being more of a character study, which this movie is as well. It's really about these characters and how they're navigating the fallout, unintended.
Hey, that was really good
though. Of our nuclear testing and the ants' carnage. I also really enjoy the nature of this particular one being this particular type of nature attacking movie being less about, spiders just attacking and being spiders. I forget which one is actual ants that are actually.
I think there's one called Ants.
There's just ants.
Yeah, there's one called Ants.
I remember them they had to like breathe it through a straw because they couldn't disrupt the ants because disrupting the ants would make them sing them. So there were two people that were sitting in the office and they're holding a straw and the ants were just covered over their bodies. It was a chilling scene. But the difference between that is this is less about us intruding into the world of nature and really just about the effects of us having played God and how nature is now subverted. So now not only did we think we're at the top and now we're at the bottom, but the things that we thought that were so tiny and beneath us, the ant is now so huge. And it's a complete just, who are we? Who are we as a people? Who are we as a species anymore?
Yeah. And I think that is part of what inspired the gigantism craze of the 50s was these things that are small and insignificant and not threatening. What would it be like if they were giant? How would the world change? How would our relationship to the world change?
Well, I think the story does a good job of using the ant-like qualities. Like when they're down in the first nest after having, put fire down there, they think they've been in the queen's nest, but then dust starts coming from the wall, and the fact that they can dig, some of them were hidden. That's pretty cool.
And again, when they're down there in the nest, one thing that really impressed me, and we were talking about the scientist's daughter, Pat, again, was she tells them, basically, now burn it with fire. And it's like, women are supposed to be nurturing. We have a soft spot for the ants. No. This shows how important this is to.
And that speaks to kind of the integrity of Pat as a scientist. She's the one who's going to say, no, I've taken the pictures. Now be done with this.
Kill it all. We got what we need. And the guys are like, really? It's like that. That's what I said. Let's go.
Yeah, I got my photos.
Yeah, it's like, that's what we need. We don't need anything else. It's already too late.
She's able to play the expert there in that she's able to identify those have hatched. And that means that this is not over yet, because it means the queens have literally flown the coop. And now we have to go find them. Where have they gone? And Edmund Gwynn has that great kind of speech where he talks about how this could go, like the kind of geometric way that they could take over the world in a matter of, a year.
Supposedly there's a science fiction writer. He used to show up a lot at conventions here in St. Louis. His name was Ed Bryant. He was a buddy of Harlan Ellison's and folks like that. And he supposedly wrote a short story called Giants that somehow resolves this problem of, what is it called? The square cube law, whereas surface area increases, volume increases even faster. And that's why, like you said, you couldn't have something that was built to be that small grow big, because it would crush itself under its own weight.
But as my wife pointed out, she's like, bees aren't supposed to be able to fly either. So who's to say? Our screen story is George Worthing Yates, and he contributed the screenplays and or screen stories for a variety of films, including Amazing Colossal Man and War of the Colossal Beast, and I think Earth versus the Spider for Burt I. Gordon. And he also did Earth versus the Flying Saucers and it came from Beneath the Sea with Ray Harryhausen. So he was definitely kind of a key player in this 50s monster craze. You mentioned the 3D aspect, that this was intended to be shot in 3D, and there were certainly other movies, you know, in this time frame. 53 was when we saw House of Wax, and 54 we did have The Creature from Black Lagoon in 3D, and its sequel in 55 was also in 3D. Do you remember, Alan, like why they opted not to do it in 3D? Was it just for a cost-effective thing?
I'd have to look it up. I don't remember exactly why. I do remember, if you look at some of the scenes, especially when the ants are smashing through the rafters and or the supports down in the tunnel at the end, it really looks like they're coming at you. So yeah, they definitely had that in mind.
Well, and even the opening title, like, which I don't remember, was bright red and blue in 3D. And I was wondering, it's like, I do not remember this when I used to watch this when I was a kid. Is that something with the DVD?
No, that was always how it was.
That's always how it was.
They were intending for it to be kind of a splashy, eye-catching moment, and then to go back into the black and white.
Yeah, no, it looks amazing, and I would love to have seen this in 3D, because especially with that antenna just coming at you and like, it's like, I think that would be very effective. And I wonder if I don't think they'd be able to do it now, but I wish.
Even when they're in when the subterranean shots, there's good use of depth for 3D that you can see where it would have been not a bad idea.
In Bill Warren's book, he mentions some stuff that was in some versions of the script. At one point, they had an ant, I think, up in Maine fighting a bear. The ant wins. And there's another one where ants attack someplace like Coney Island, and they chase some woman into the fun house, and there are those rotating floors, and when the ant is in there, or the lady, and stuff like that. So,
oh man, it could have been a sequel. And kind of speaking to what we were, mentioning with the white men in rooms smoking, is that there was a Native American element initially in the original drafts. One of the police officers was going to be played as a Native American. That is one thing that is conspicuously absent from this landscape, because in New Mexico, there would be Native Americans somewhere in the mix, and we see nothing but white people everywhere.
It is called White Sands. Maybe that's just
exclusive.
It was called something else, but colonizers. White Sands. I would love to take a moment just briefly to talk about the sound design. The sound design with the ants, the way with them communicating, particularly hit home with this year. I don't know if any of you have been in any of the places where the cicadas have been everywhere. I have video of being by a tree that was shimmering just with the activity and the sound that just emanates. And it reminded me of other insects, like when you see bees in a honeycomb and you see them shimmer when they communicate, you see the ripple across the honeycomb. That's what the sound was like. And I was like, this is so cool to see a version of this now from 54 that's still really, really, really effective to me. I love that.
Well, and I think it became kind of the iconic insect noise that we're going to hear. Like when you hear a spider, when you hear anything, locusts, whatever, you're going to hear shades of them.
We've had quite the cicada infestation here too. And first thing you think of when you step outside, them.
One of the things I wrote down when Ed Blackburn gets killed and James Whitmore is in the office and his captain is like, look, Blackburn got killed. Get over it. It's not your fault and all that stuff. And I was like, wow, 1950s sensitivity.
Yep. That. Just suck it up.
But then on the segment on the DVD, it actually says "Bye Bye Blackburn," and I'm like, oh, that's just mean. That's just really mean that you could do really that. Funny. But then it's when you get to, you've got Mrs. Lodge, I think, and one of the guys, he's not in uniform, he's in a suit, which kudos to everyone, especially when they're in LA and they're saying it's like everyone has to stay inside. No one's going apeshit.
Right.
It's like they're all dressed to the nines, hats, everything. It's like, stay calm, go inside. I'm like, kudos to you guys for keeping it together and looking magnificent. Every single extra out there. But then when they are by the LA River and stuff, and they're saying, it's like, why don't we just, set everything on fire and all this stuff? It's like, not if the two kids. And the guy's like, we're risking everything for the two kids. Like, who cares? And Whitmore, again, it's like, yeah, you want to tell that to their mom? It's like, so I see what you mean. It's like, okay, well, the entire million population of LA, it's like, yeah, we can't have that. We can't make that mom cry. Let's risk everyone. And I'm like, again, I love you, 1954 film.
Yep,
it's like you switch it on a dime.
A little collateral damage never hurt anybody.
Yeah.
Except for
and
those
then
two
again,
kids.
maybe it does. Let's go.
I would also mention a couple of scenes that a little bit more understated, but the thing that always traumatized me watching this as a kid for the first time, it was the little girl and putting the formic acid under her nose and everything gets real quiet. And then she leans forward and starts screeching them, that. And then the music swells and, that. Yeah. And also, again, watching it this time around, James Whitmore gets those kids out, but then you see the shadow on the wall of like, oh, it's like looking at Max Schreck shadow from Nosferatu coming for you. No, the Reaper isn't cheated that easily. Yeah.
There was something you spoke about the sound design, Matthew. Am I wrong, or did I hear like 3 separate Wilhelm screams over the course of this movie? I was like, what? I'm just hearing wah, wah, wah. Like, every time somebody gets offed by an ant, it's a Wilhelm scream time.
I think that's an accurate count. Yeah, 3. That's actually, I think, specifically in IMDb trivia. I think they notate.
Oh, did that? I was
3
just
Wilhelm screams. Yeah,
just watching it and going, I think that's a record for me. I've never heard 3 in a single film.
Well, one moment is when they're in that store early on, and the shot goes down, and we see the little ants crawling all over the sugar. It's kind of ominous since we've heard about this problem, and what would ordinarily be no big deal suddenly seems worrisome. I do have a question for the group. I read that this has been seen by some as a metaphor for the communism, in the middle of the Red Scare time, and I wondered what you all thought.
How is it a metaphor? Can you go extrapolate on that?
That the ants represented infiltration of our culture, and that it is our job as a country to keep it out.
I think that reads, totally fair, especially with it coming for our children. Mm-hmm. That the fear that's always been a part of a popular. Whenever anyone's trying to scapegoat anybody, it feels that's what about the kids? What about the children? They're going after them. Mm-hmm. Also, playing into what Katie mentioned about how everyone's playing together, everyone's playing nice together. This is about unity. This is a united front that we have as at least Southwest Americans against this invading force. I think that plays really well into that. Yeah.
And Matthew, what you just mentioned, that's one of the things that makes this movie so scary at times is the little girl is not just threatened herself, but she was hiding in a little tiny cabinet while outside her mom and dad were getting killed.
Yeah.
And of course, the father of the 2 little kids, he got his arm ripped off by one of the ants. So destruction of the family is a pretty big taboo that this movie faces.
And on the flip side of that, I think there's a really lovely metaphor for the condemnation of having used nuclear weapons, and that there is a repercussion for it. In the larger scheme, we think, well, that's what won the war. And it's like on another level, it's the thing that it may have just been us winning a battle, but now we're going to lose the war against, in order to live on this planet. And I thought that was a really kind of brave statement for an American film to be like, yeah, we kind of messed up a little bit there.
Well, agreed. And as you said earlier, that at the same time, on the other side of the world, they were making Godzilla, which has a similar theme.
Yeah, it's interesting when watching Godzilla and them side by side, because you have Takashi Shimura plays the old scientist, and his daughter, or someone very much like a daughter figure, accompanies him. And then we have our hero, and we have a menace, and we have, that it's all about watching the destruction that is wrought by nuclear power. Those 2 films are interestingly in conversation with one another, even though they weren't. And I think that's really kind of fascinating.
It's kind of interesting is even today, right now, St. Louis, where I live, this is where they processed the uranium for the Manhattan Project. And when they did that, a lot of the waste products wound up simply being dumped places, including places that turned into stuff like soccer fields where kids played. So we have a huge waterway called Canteen Creek, and they think that the contamination got into that. And right now in Washington, they're trying to fight to get some sort of restitution for people who experience cancer, their families, from just dumping that stuff around. So, yeah, so some of those hazards are still there.
Well, with the soccer field, I mean, you always the reality of it is cancer, of course, health concerns. You always hope it's going to be like Shaolin soccer, and you'll get powers, and you'll be able to kick that ball really fast. It doesn't quite happen. I don't know why. One thing that I was going to point out about this movie that has so much in common with so many of the kaiju films we were just talking about is it isn't just isolated to just a rural area. It's not isolated to an urban area. You really get the idea that this is a problem that you can't hide from it. This is going to, whatever your walk of life, whatever your socioeconomic class happens to be, you will be impacted.
That's actually interesting because, Godzilla starts off on Oto Island and ends up in Tokyo in the same way that like it ends up, the ants are in the desert and they end up in LA. I hadn't actually drawn that parallel before.
So I was also thinking about, just really quickly, we were talking about Creature of Black Lagoon earlier. That's something that does so well with keeping it in an isolated environment. And so much of horror can be mined from just being in an isolated environment. The number of movies that use that as opposed to use populated urban environments, definitely not a one-to-one there. So I really enjoy how they're taking, honestly, the King Kong Godzilla approach. We're going to have it here, and then we're going to take it over here into more of an urban space.
Yeah.
That's still your problem.
Creature from the Black Lagoon, does that with its sequel. It's like the second half of King Kong.
When you guys are talking about the metaphor for the Red Scare, Matthew, you were talking about like it's not just an isolated incident; it can go everywhere, and we have to watch out for it. That to me talks about the Red Scare. It's like how you may think it's just in the big city or something like that, but it can just go, and that is one of the things that put the fear into people. And I never actually thought about the film like that. And as the whole thing, like everyone working together to fight this thing, like, again, I never thought about that. It's like with McCarthyism, it's like, let's all come together and fight this thing. We can do this. And I'm like, wow, this is a big learning experience for me, guys. I was just thinking it's about huge ants and learn about formic acid. Like, look at that.
Katie, one of the things that you just mentioned is the way that they're trying to fight and gather information about the ants. If I read this, and I haven't seen Oppenheimer, maybe they talk about this in this, they're gathering information like when they were assembling the atomic bomb. One place does one little secret thing and they don't know what these other guys are for. And they said, what are all these microphones in here for? What are all these reports of flying? Why are we gathering information about flying saucers? What's that got to do with
right
what's going on? So, yeah.
Oh, that's true as well. See, this movie, I love it.
I bring this back. Are we going to talk about Van Helsing this way? No. We're going to talk about them like this.
Van Helsing, which is also celebrating an anniversary this year, and which we probably won't be featuring on this show.
Oh, everybody's lost.
Well, thank you all so much. This was a really delightful conversation. And again, one of my favorite 50s sci-fi movies and the one that kind of started it all. So thank you all for joining in the conversation, and look forward to having you all on again very soon.
Thank you.
Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.